In today's video, I want to share a story about how a single moment, one choice, one glance, can change the rhythm of everything you thought was certain. It's a story about trust, longing, and the thin line between watching and becoming part of what unfolds. Before we dive in, please take a quick second to like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more powerful, human stories with you. Now let's begin. I stood at the edge of the room, watching them. There was nothing particularly dramatic about the moment. Yet something in the air carried weight. She was close to him, speaking softly, her gestures deliberate and calm. He glanced toward me for the briefest second, as if searching for permission he wasn't sure he had. That's when I realized. Sometimes silence says far more than words ever could. Her name was Elise. We'd met weeks earlier when I was searching for someone to help my husband, Daniel, prepare a special presentation. Someone confident, someone who understood subtlety. From the first moment, I could sense there was something about her presence that filled a room. Not loudly, not forcefully, but through quiet assurance. She was composed, collected. Every move she made carried intention. And perhaps that's what intrigued me most, the control. How long have you been doing this? I had asked her once during one of our first meetings. She smiled faintly. 6 years, maybe 7. It's not really work anymore, more like instinct. I watched her closely, trying to read something beneath that calm surface. There was no arrogance in her tone, only certainty. Her confidence wasn't something learned, it was something lived. Do you ever get nervous? I asked. Not really, she said. I like when someone's paying attention. There was something about that answer, bold but not boastful, that stayed with me. It made me realize how long it had been since I felt the same. Attention, the kind that sees you completely, without needing to speak, had become a memory. At home, Daniel was always kind, stable, predictable. We had routines, shared breakfasts, soft laughter, a rhythm that kept us grounded. But somewhere along the line, routine became repetition. Our days began to blend. Our conversations shortened, and our silences grew longer. I loved him, but sometimes love isn't enough to keep something alive when curiosity has faded. Elise entered our lives quietly, just another project, another name in Daniel's schedule. But the more I watched them work together, the more I noticed how easily he smiled around her. Not inappropriately, not flirtatiously, just freely, in a way I hadn't seen in years. And maybe that's where it began, not with touch or words but with energy. That evening, after she left, Daniel asked, "What did you think of her?" "She seems steady," I said. He nodded. "Yeah. It's rare to meet someone who never seems uncertain." There was something wistful in his voice, admiration, maybe. It didn't bother me, at least not yet. But part of me wondered whether stability in another person reminded him of what we'd lost between us. The next few days blurred together. Meetings, dinners, passing hellos. But something inside me was shifting. Not jealousy, not suspicion, but awareness. It felt like standing outside your own home, watching light move through the windows, realizing you'd forgotten what warmth looked like. So I started paying attention, not to them, but to me. I watched how I moved around Daniel, how often I avoided eye contact, how I smiled politely instead of laughing fully. I saw how love had become something we performed, not something we lived. And that realization cut deeper than anything else. Elise called one afternoon. "I finished the project," she said. "Would you like me to drop it off in person?" Her tone was casual, but I heard something else. Not distance, not closeness, but curiosity. When she arrived, she didn't stand at the door. She stepped inside as though she already belonged there. We talked. About life. About work. About how people change when they stop being seen. "Do you ever feel invisible?" I asked. She paused, studying me. "Sometimes. But I've learned that invisibility isn't about who's looking. It's about who's hiding." That sentence stayed with me long after she left. That night, Daniel came home late. He looked tired, distant. When he climbed into bed, I reached for his hand. He squeezed it gently, but his mind was somewhere else. We didn't talk. We didn't argue. We just lay there, together, yet not really with each other. Sometimes the absence of conflict feels louder than the presence of love. The next morning, I made a decision, one that wasn't about revenge or validation, but truth. I invited Elise again. Not for work this time. Just for conversation. When she arrived, sunlight spilled across the floor, painting gold lines between us. I asked her to sit. She did, calm, attentive. What are you really doing here? I finally asked. She met my gaze without hesitation. I think you already know, she said. Her words weren't a confession. They were a mirror. In that moment, I realized this wasn't about her and Daniel at all. It was about me, about the parts of myself I'd silenced to make peace with comfort. Elise wasn't temptation. She was reflection. The version of me I had stopped being. Confident. Certain. Alive. And maybe that's why Daniel was drawn to her energy, because it was something I'd let slip away. That night, I spoke to Daniel. No accusations. No anger. Just honesty. When was the last time you looked at me and really saw me? He stared, confused. What do you mean? I see you every day. I smiled sadly. No. You look at me, Daniel. You don't see me. The silence that followed said everything. We spent hours talking that night, really talking. About what we'd lost, what we'd ignored, and what we were both afraid to admit. That love without attention becomes memory, not connection. Weeks passed. Elise moved on to another project. But her presence lingered, not as a ghost, but as a reminder. She taught me something I hadn't realized I'd forgotten. That to love someone deeply, you have to first see yourself again. Daniel and I began rebuilding, slowly, gently. Not by pretending everything was fine, but by acknowledging what wasn't. We learned that sometimes the most intimate thing you can do isn't to touch, but to understand. And sometimes, the greatest distance in a relationship isn't physical, it's emotional silence. Now when I stand at the edge of the room and watch him, laughing, alive, present, I don't feel like an outsider anymore. Because I'm not just watching. I'm part of it again. They say rebuilding a relationship is like learning to walk again, after forgetting how to move. At first, every step feels unsure. Every word feels rehearsed. But if you keep showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, something begins to shift. Daniel and I were learning how to move again. We didn't erase the past. We didn't pretend Elise never existed. Instead, we spoke about her. Openly, like adults trying to understand what her presence revealed about us. She didn't cause the distance, Daniel said one night. She just showed me it was there. And as much as that hurt, I knew he was right. Sometimes the person who changes your relationship isn't the one who breaks it. It's the one who holds up a mirror. Days passed differently now. We started taking morning walks again, the kind we hadn't done in years. The first few were silent, heavy with unspoken memories, but slowly, words began to return. Conversations about work, about the future, about small, forgotten dreams. It felt fragile at first, like holding something glass in both hands, terrified to drop it. One morning, while walking near the old cafe we used to love, Daniel stopped. Do you ever think we were happier when we had less? He asked. I thought about that for a moment. No, I said. I think we were happier when we had time. He nodded quietly. And in that single exchange I realized, love doesn't fade from lack of care. It fades from lack of attention. We started to slow down. Dinner without phones. Sundays without plans. And though not every night felt easy, every morning felt lighter. But healing isn't linear. Some days, old memories came back like shadows on the wall. Reminders of what nearly broke us. One evening, I found an old notebook. Inside it, I'd written pages of thoughts I never shared. Half-finished letters. Unsent apologies. I flipped through them, realizing how often I'd chosen silence over honesty. When Daniel came into the room, I handed him the notebook. Read this, I said softly. He hesitated but opened it. Page after page his eyes shifted, surprise, sadness, understanding. When he looked up his voice cracked. I didn't know you felt this alone. And I whispered. I didn't know how to tell you. That night, we talked until dawn. Not as husband and wife, but as two people trying to meet each other again. We laughed. We cried. We remembered why we chose each other in the first place. It wasn't passion that saved us. It was vulnerability. Weeks later, Elise reached out. Not with drama, not with guilt, just a message. I hope you both found what you were looking for. I smiled when I read it. Because we hadn't found everything yet, but we had found our way back to trying. And that was enough. I didn't reply to her message right away. Instead, I sat by the window, watching the city lights blink against the quiet of our living room. I thought about the person I'd been when she entered our lives, lost, uncertain, disconnected. And the woman I was now, still imperfect, still learning, but awake again. Sometimes people enter your story not to stay, but to wake you up. Daniel joined me by the window. Without saying a word, he wrapped his arm around me. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like an act of habit, it felt like choice. We stood there in silence, the city moving beneath us, and for once, silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Months passed. We began rebuilding our house, not physically but emotionally. We replaced arguments with honesty. We replaced distance with presence. I started writing again, stories about moments that almost broke people but ended up mending them instead. Because that's what life is. Not perfect but persistent. One day, Daniel handed me a small box. Inside was a silver keychain engraved with 2 words. Still here. He smiled. For everything we almost lost, and everything we found again. I laughed, tears catching in my throat. Still here, I whispered. And in that moment, it felt like a promise, not just to each other but to ourselves. Now when I look back, I don't see betrayal or regret. I see awakening. A painful, necessary reminder that even love needs to evolve. Elise wasn't the villain. She was the catalyst. The moment that forced us to choose between silence and truth. And we chose truth. Sometimes, I still stand at the edge of the room, watching Daniel. The way his eyes soften when he laughs, the way he looks at me now with curiosity again. And every time, I whisper to myself, don't look away. Because that's what love really is. Attention that never stops choosing you. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps me bring you more stories about the quiet corners of love, where forgiveness begins and rediscovery takes shape. Remember, healing doesn't happen overnight. It happens in small moments, in shared laughter, honest words, and the courage to stay, even when leaving feels easier. Because love isn't about never falling apart.